Alright everyone, now I want to look at doing an ivy setup or kind of crawling plants. I first want to talk to you very quickly about if you open up the Cambodia tree asset that I've provided, there's a max file, you'll see something very similar to this. When you open it, you're going to get, like, if you click on this guy, nothing's going to happen. You'll be like, where's the tree? Well, the tree is here, but because I checked manual update before I saved it, you are going to have to update it in order to see the tree. It will build the mesh, it will do all of that stuff. Had I not checked that, when you open the file, you would get a GrowFX dialog, it would start opening, so on and so forth. Generally, that is a bad practice, I think. Like when you are working on your file, you're doing your stuff, you've got it where you want, check this checkbox so that if you're working in a studio setting and somebody else is going to open your file, they don't get the lovely surprise of a 45-minute build for a tree. Not to say that it will be that long, but depending on what you did and what you set up, it could be that long, and maybe that person was just going in to like grab an asset or something like that. So good practice, keep this guy checked once you have set your tree up the way you want. Alright, so now I'm going to do a different setup here. So I'm going to, apparently I never added that to the layer, tisk chad. Okay, so this is my environment hero tree, GrowFX. Now I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call this environment. First, I'm going to delete layer 1. Environment. I'm going to spell this all correct. Environment. And then we'll call this Ivy GrowFX. And say okay. Go quickly to organize. If you're using the new onion, you can just middle click this guy and pull it down. If you are not, if you are unfortunate like me, you have to use this guy. Alright, so I'm now put my new GrowFX into this layer, and now what I'm going to do, because this is what I want to set as my current working layer, I'm going to click on this guy, and now anything I create is going to go into that layer. This is either onion, new or old. This little checkbox there will do the same thing. So I'm going to go to X level, and I'm going to create a GrowFX. Even though I'm going to use points in this scenario, you still have to create your initial GrowFX icon. And because I'm going to do Ivy, I'm going to set this guy to like 2 feet. This is going to be a smaller plant, so I want a smaller scale reference. I will name this GrowFX Ivy 1. If I'm doing like a setup that I'm going to use a lot, I might call this Master or something like that. But for this, I'm just going to call it 001 because I'm feeling very creative. Now before I do anything, I'm going to create some points. And these guys are going to be like the birthing locations of my ivy. Generally, depending on kind of like camera angle and stuff, I'll sometimes like hide these guys from the camera. So, you know, if the camera's kind of looking like this and maybe I've got some foreground, I'll put one like lower so you don't see where they're initially growing, or I might put this guy like, you know, back over here and then give it a vector and make it kind of come around the corner. For this will be fine. Okay, so let's say, you know, that's cool. So if you didn't watch the previous video on the Cambodia tree, go back and watch it, because in there I cover how I got to this mesh and why I have this mesh in the first place. I'm not going to go over that again. So I've got my GrowFX Ivy, I've got some points. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start with a path. I'm just going to call this stalk. Open up my distributors and my direction modifiers. And I'm going to create a distributor. This time though, I'm going to create point distributor. So you'll be greeted with this pick point nodes. So I will pick, come on here, pick each of these guys. And then click that again to turn off the selection. So now you'll see, I'm going to make these guys smaller. I don't like their size. Okay, so you'll see I've got these like base guys. One's pointing out all weird. This guy's doing his thing. And very similar to the Cambodia tree, I'm going to add a random direction to these guys. And probably 2-inch step size, something like that. And let's see what this gets. And pretty quickly, I'm going to add a object reaction when I'm doing something like this. Pick the object. And just like I did before, I'm going to turn on magnetic, and I'm going to generate points on faces, and set this number a little bit lower. So right now I'm only, well, I'm magnetic, but I'm only magnetic to a distance of 1.8 feet off the surface, and with a pretty minimal strength. So I'm going to bring this up a lot higher than I probably need and start cranking on that max strength. And so you might be like, well, this isn't very accurate. And that's correct, it's not. And the way that you can get that more accurate, not 1 foot, is the smaller the step size and the smaller the step on face size is, the more accurate this will be. But that's going to come at a cost. If you want this stuff like right on it for whatever reason you have, and also bringing down your reflection distance, that's going to help. It's going to only reflect 3 inches off the surface now as opposed to 5 inches. But if you want this like right on that surface, you need to bring your step on face size down, and you need to bring the steps of your spline down. But that can cause excessively long computation on these guys. So be wary. Now let's say I don't, I want these guys maybe to kind of go upward a little bit. I could add a vector. I could push them up in that way. But maybe I'm happy with this. If you want them to be a little like crazier, you can always crank on this max strength, and that'll really kind of, it keeps them down a little bit, but they react to the mesh a little bit more kind of chaotically, or sometimes interestingly. Let's say I'm happy with this, so I'd copy, and I would make a B1. And from this point, very similar to a tree, I'm going to make some branches. I'm going to leave the step size low because I want these guys to, bad move. And I'm going to paste as instance that object reaction on here. Okay, so now we're getting these like secondary guys, and I might want this a little lower. You'll see, now it's thinking much harder, and that max strength, this is not so relevant that high anymore. It's basically like pulled down this guy, you know, because it's so close. Not that I needed that low. You know, all of this is a little bit of a balancing act. Oops. I just kind of tweak on it until I get something that I want, honestly. If you start to get this stuff where it's like, you know, pulling down on itself, I might come back to my stalks and add a vector. And this vector, if you leave it by default, it's just going to go in the direction of the point, you know, that it's growing off of. So I might want this guy to go like 10. So now, you know, he's growing up again instead of, well, he's not. He's misbehaving. There we go. So he's back up. You know, and that's kind of the stuff that you've got to mess with. For this one, there are circumstances where it's like, all right, there we go. It's just taking a second. Mess with this step size just a little bit. See if I can draw these guys in a little bit more. I just want to see what I've got. Ah, damn it. So it's starting to behave. And some of this, you know, honestly, like, ivy doesn't stick exactly on the surface everywhere. So some of this coming off, it gives it like a nice texture, and I don't mind that, because if it's just like completely flat the entire time, it's pretty boring looking. So especially in like if it's like a kudzu or something like that, that stuff goes insane. So this would probably be totally fine. Just, nope, don't want you to go down that low. Cheeky bastard. So this guy's being a shit. I was going to turn this off. So I'm just turning off that initial branching. Oh, that's why. God. Come on. Nope. Not the only reason why. There we go. Alright, just to get him back up on that surface. And then bring this back. Alright. Then again, add another branch. Ivy, I frequently do like 4 branches and then like a twig thing up on top of that. I don't worry a whole lot about, like, when I'm doing a tree, all of those other, yeah, the branches and them kind of getting shorter and whatnot. You'll see I'm not adding like a ton of other curves to it, because really it's more about getting a coverage and less about getting a shape or a contour, you know, to the tree. So I'll again set this going to B1, and it's kind of like rinse and repeat here. Add a random vector, and then paste instance. And I would make this pretty substantially shorter. But you can see, like, you know, we're starting to take up some calculation time at this point. And you know, this is where you can start to, you know, not 2 feet. You can start to think about, you know, do I really need the resolution that I think I need? Introduce some chaos so everything is not the same length. And sometimes I will de-instance these guys. I'll make this guy unique. And I'll mess with these values to not 7 feet. Secondary branches often want to be like a much smaller step size in order to get them to behave. And often you'll want to like give it a vector, because these guys are like, you know, before I even added that object reaction, they were going out into like, you know, wild space. So now I've got some guys who are like folding on top of themselves, which not totally what I want. There we go. Tightened it down a little bit. Alright, so once I have this, I might add a little, might tweak this, the density on this guy, bring it down a little bit on this first one. Same with this. It's nice to have, you know, these sections where it's like crazy overgrown, and then you show, you know, the structure underneath. So it's really important when you're doing the IV not to just like cover the damn thing, even if that's like what the concept showed. Don't do that. Give it moments of repose. Give it moments where you see the structure, the underlying structure underneath. It really helps to sell it. Otherwise, it just ends up looking like this kind of scaleless blob of like attack plant. So don't do that. So then I might add my stems. Give me good things there. Adding these guys cannot always give you good stuff. No. So this is this is where there's like a little bit of a compromise. You know, you want everything to be like reacting to the object and whatnot. But at a point, the ivy kind of starts to like come off the surface a little bit, and these stems are really when it does it. So this object reaction, instead of doing like a magnetic and pulling it toward it, I will do one that simply reflects. So I don't want these like growing into it, and they won't if I have reflect on, but they're also not going to be attracted to it. And that'll help to like shape these guys a little bit more interesting, these stems, because this is where I'm going to shoot leaves off of. Give this some chaos. More density. And then finally, I'll do my leaves. And path. Set these guys to stem. Something like 4 inches. And my density probably needs to be quite a bit higher because these guys are so short. Oftentimes, like just a straight up density of 1 is not going to give you what you want. You'll be like, I don't have any leaves. You do. You're just not seeing them because your path length is so small. So I generally on the leaves, you know, crank the density. And again, some chaos. All right. The other thing I'll do when I'm doing ivy is you often have like little dead bits that are kind of like leading out and kind of left behind. That's one thing that's often forgotten in doing vegetation. Like everything's perfectly green and so pristine and lovely. Shit dies, and capturing that really helps to sell stuff and make it a lot more convincing. Dead leaves, dead sticks, dead plants, like all of that stuff is really important in creating like a beautiful image. Everything is not alive. Stuff is dying and decomposing, and it's important to put those elements into here. So I will frequently add another 1 or 2 kind of dead branches. I cannot spell today. On top of this, that no. Yes. All right, dead branches, and I will shoot this off of my stalk again. I'll make them so they're like, you know, kind of isolated toward the top. Same types of things, random direction. Give them some fun shape, and then instance on that object reaction to make these guys kind of behave and conform to that mesh. And these, when I mesh them, I don't put any leaves, anything like that on this stuff. So I'll kind of mess with where they shoot off. And generally these guys, I make them unique. They don't have the same parameters. And come on. And it's more just to give some, like, within all of it, some dead growth, stuff that is not green, just some sticks that shoot out and aren't, you know, perfect and pristine. But it really adds it adds a ton. That's, you know, one of the things that, like, you know, that, like, built-in tool that just crashes your scene. I forget what that thing is called. It's like the scene crasher. That doesn't really do that all that well. So this, you can really, like, spec, you know, all sorts of little dead bits and stuff like that up on top of that. And then for something like this, for Ivy, when I'm doing the meshing, it's all cylinders. Let me go down to the base. I do not meta mesh this stuff. It's really important that you don't go crazy with meta mesh. Okay, it's super cool and can do some great stuff, but, you know, be reasonable. Don't try to meta mesh every single plant that you make from now on. It's not going to end well for you if you do that. And a lot of these, this is instances where I'll copy this mesh and I'll paste this guy around. This is kind of a generic, and you can paste instance if you'd like. It's kind of a generic setup, but it's okay for Ivy. Every little thing does not need to be, you know, so perfect. And even at this point, once you, like, instance it and it's fast and, you know, you get everything set up and looking the way you want, then you can always go in and you can make the, you know, you can make it unique. And just like I showed on that crappy tree, these guys will be leaf meshes. And so stuff will run quicker. I'm going to turn off edge faces. And based on the type of, the type of ivy or kudzu, you know, they have different types of leaves, so I will shape this, as I showed you guys, you know, using this width channel in this, like, graph, you can kind of, we can bring this guy, make it thinner. Maybe we only want this to be 3 inches. And this is where you start to see, like, okay, you know, what looked like totally crazy in spline form and like it was going to completely cover this thing, like, you know, it ain't cutting it. I would say this is not nearly enough kind of stuff everywhere, stems, maybe leaves. This is where I might play with, one, either the density of my leaves, so I might bring that up, and then 2, I might also give myself more stems. I'm going to double that. Yeah, something like that. Right, and that is growing ivy on your ruins, rocks, plants, what have you. I'll go into textures and stuff like that, leaf materials, that type of thing. I'm going to do that in one foul swoop. I'm not going to material every single plant and tree that I build for you guys and kind of demonstrate. But I do want you to, you know, realize, obviously I would UV this. I'd go back into the parameters, just as I showed you before. At this point, once I have this guy like this, I'm like, okay, like, I'm digging that. I'm happy with it. Manual update, really important, check that, and then I would come in here and I would start going in, tweaking my UVs. I would set these absolute, probably like 6 feet. Again, as I said, somewhere around 6 to 8 feet is frequently what I what I do. I would set that up for each of these, and if you instance them, this would already be set up for you. And as I said, you know, I generally do that with this type of object. I'll instance those meshes, and you'll see, like, so I got that one for free. I think this one's going to be set up as well. Yep. So perfect example of, you know, banging that out nice and quick. I'm going to get into vertex color. I will shade this. I'll show you guys how I would go about doing the ivy in a second video. But this is creating the ivy, not shading the ivy. All right, moving right along. I'm going to end this one and expect more.